Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Welcome to another weekly study. Today, we are going to go over a couple of pieces of information in chapter 3, basics of behavior change. And this is actually for Kathy, who posted the question in the Facebook group. And so Kathy had basically said, can you explain this in simple terms? And she was speaking of, now remember, chapter 3 has a lot of information, starts with and by the way, if you look on page 59, I guess it is, that there are 3 main areas in this particular chapter. Behavioral theory models. So basically they're talking about the health belief, self-determination, and then the trans theoretical model. Now I've done previous studies on pretty much each one of those. More than happy to do them again if you need some more assistance on it. Look, for the most part, when it comes to the actual behavioral theory models, they're giving you, ACE is simply covering some of the most basic elements and issues that go along with them for use as a trainer when you're dealing with clients. The health belief and the self-determination theory, they're great. Read them, very interesting. But it's the TTM, the trans theoretical model, that in general in the fitness industry and personal training, that's the one that we kind of hone in on. And that's where you'd probably see more questions if you're going to be asked about those. I know Kathy was not asking about that, but real quick, in the TTM, you've got the 5 different stages, what are known as the stages of change. Pretty straightforward. All you have to do with them is memorize basically what each of them describes. Remember, in the stages of change, these are mental constructs, right? Not necessarily behaviors. There's lots of people that will talk about doing exercise and eating healthy, and they really want to, and you're thinking, wow, that person must be in preparation, they're really gung-ho, when in fact, no, they're in contemplation. They may even psychologically sort of be in a pre-contemplation, sort of in contemplation, but nevertheless, the point is that with the TTM, with the trans-theoretical model, that's where you're going to need to know the vast majority of the information and how it's used to deal with people from a behavioral change perspective, because that's kind of the goal, chapter 3. But what Kathy was asking was in the second part, which are principles of behavior change. And I think the issue, like in many cases, it's terminology. We're just not familiar with a lot of the terms that are being used. Why? Because this information, by the way, is coming from the world of psychology. And so a lot of it is sort of academic or terminology, academic type of terminology that has to be translated into the real world somehow or another. And if you don't get that, it could be a little bit challenging. So I get it. Now, look, as with any type of study that you're doing, please keep a couple of things in mind. Look what I got here. I've got colored markers, I got a pen, I got a pencil if you wanted to use a pencil. I've got pad, paper. Remember that at the end of the day, you've got to memorize the material. Now, understanding it, that's an added benefit. It really is. But in order to pass the exam, which is what most folks want to do, is you've got to memorize the material. And remember, this methodology works pretty much for anything that you're going over in the book. The other thing to keep in mind is that we do provide you, you can get it right from the Facebook group here. We have study guides. We have general study guides. Also in the Body Design University materials, we actually provide a chapter by chapter audio and a chapter by chapter explanation, just as I'm doing here with you now. Now, for the sake of the post, though, that we had here in the Facebook group, I'm going to go to page 82, I believe it is. Right. So if you got your textbook, have a look. Principles of behavior change, and then you've got some terms. Now, remember, what ACE is trying to help you to do is to hone in on some very specific areas. That's one of the reasons why they give you the apply what you know boxes. Now, I'm not saying that you're necessarily going to see a whole lot of questions from the apply what you know boxes, but these are really good bits of information and takeaways from the particular area of study that you're looking at. And so to kind of help Kathy out and anybody else that's having any issues with this, let's go ahead and start. So I'm going to pull up our slides here, and we'll have a look at principles of behavioral change. Again, this is the second part. There's 3 main parts to chapter 3, and this is that center part after we look at the actual theories, behavioral change theories. So principles of behavior change, and remember, I'm going to be taking notes. I'll be writing things. Sometimes I'll draw with colored pens just to help get that into my brain and memorize it a little bit better. The idea here with operant conditioning. So that's going to be the first terms on page 82. It's the process by which behaviors are influenced by their consequences. So here's the deal with operant conditioning. And real quick, just as a side bit of information, operant conditioning is based on what's known as behavioralism. It's a psychological philosophy, right? B.F. Skinner, if you ever heard of that individual's name, Harvard professor, brilliant dude. He's kind of like the guy that really pushed behavioralism in psychology. At the end of the day, there's consequences to your behaviors. That's really what this is coming down to. And those behaviors, right, that lead to consequences are generally going to be brought about by initial conditions, right? What we call antecedents. So if you look at page 82 and you're reading through it, operant conditioning is the process, right? So it's a conditioning process. The term operant, basically all you're trying to get here is that how a person behaves, operant, is conditioned by the environment and by the ultimate consequences or circumstances that lead after you've committed or done the behavior. So remember, everything here is about behavior. It's one of the reasons why behavioralism, it's still used. It's still a part of the psychological, even the psychoanalytical processes. And if you go to counseling, there are psychologists who are staunch behavioralists. Most ones that I know, at least, have shifted into the cognitive psychology. And they kind of use both cognitive or behavioral cognition, things like that. Operant conditioning, if you read through it, process by which behaviors are influenced. The things you do are going to be everything from driving to the gym to making a decision about what you're going to eat. All of those behaviors, whether you're going to smoke or not smoke, to the behaviors, to this line of thought in this operant conditioning mindset, they're influenced by the consequences that occur after you do the behavior. That's what it's about. So these are what are known as antecedents. So when you move on to antecedents, right now that's in bold, so it's an important concept to understand. This is going to throw you off. What is an antecedent? Normally, when we see the word anti, we see A-N-T-I, right? Anti, against. Well, antecedent, though, is prior to. So an antecedent is a condition prior to, or environmental condition prior to, in this case, a behavior that you are going to perform, right? And again, from the behavioralist perspective, it's just easy to think about one little single linear behavior. I get in my car and I go to the gym, or I look at a donut and I either eat it or I don't eat it. From the behavioralist perspective, from an operant conditioning standpoint, there are consequences to me eating that donut, right? And they're not good. Well, I mean, they're good in the short run, especially if it's a chocolate, cream-filled Bavarian cream, which is my favorite filled donut. There's going to be consequences, though, to eating it. Some are good, maybe some are bad. An antecedent is basically, and if you look at what they said, part of the learning experience is realizing the consequences of your behaviors, coming in or getting late to the gym, not doing your cardio at the end of a workout. See, there are real world applications to this. And ACE actually gives you that information and tells you and gives you some ideas. And you can literally Google antecedents stimulus control, and you'll get 1 million hits on your Google search. But you can see all the different, or at least look at all the many different analogies that can be used to discuss this. So an antecedents, are basically help in the process of stimulus control, because stimulus control is a way that you can manage behaviors. And that's what they write. Antecedents can be manipulated in the environment to maximize the likelihood of desirable behaviors, i.e., I want to get to the gym on time and I want to do it on a regular, consistent basis. I want to eat good food and I want to do it on a regular, consistent basis. Can you help me? Yeah, sure, we can help you. Those things that we're going to help you with are considered stimulus control. We are controlling the stimuli, the initiating stimuli, the antecedents that are going to help with moving somebody towards appropriate behavior or away from inappropriate behavior. So the operant conditioning concept, conditioning an individual's behaviors, what they're going to do, is affected by what? Well, there's a number of different consequences that we look at. And to the operant conditioning behavioralist, there's basically four consequences, and that's what Ace will talk about here. If you move on to page 84, consequences at the very top. So what are the consequences related to this concept of operant conditioning? And what they'll tell you is the most important component, operant conditioning, is what happens after the behavior is executed. This is the behaviorist worldview. It's what happens after that basically is going to either assist in continuing the desired behavior or not. And so these four things I'm going to go over, but just keep in mind, in the world of fitness, in the world of personal training, we understand the simplicity of operant conditioning. We really do. It is not the end all. And that's why Ace is going to now move into, after you talk about the consequences, into cognitions and behavior. Okay, so just keep that in mind. What are the four consequences? This is what you need to know. We call it positive reinforcement. This is the one that we generally speak to or talk about when you're dealing with your kids or you're dealing with an animal like a dog. And by the way, Skinner, the guy who really pushed this concept forward, did a lot of studies using rats. He used birds, I believe it was pigeons. And he did a lot of studies on the behaviors of these animals based on the result of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, things like that. Okay. So basically, if I give my dog a treat after he, my dog, for instance, who's actually sitting right over there, we've taught her, quote, taught her to sit. So her name is Bella, by the way. I say, Bella, sit, and she'll sit down. Now, if I give her a treat, because she likes, a treat, if I give her something after she does the behavior, that's what we call positive reinforcement. Because now what's going to happen is every time she hears my voice and hears that word, sit, which she doesn't understand, she just understands the sound, she actually does the behavior. And over and over and over and over, I can give her a treat. That's a positive reinforcement. It's called a reward. It's the same thing with exercise and fitness and eating well. The positive reinforcement for somebody eating a good, healthy diet is what? Well, the positive reinforcement, the reward that they get is whatever that particular individual finds pleasing or rewarding. For some folks, it's the immediate gratification of knowing that they did something healthy. That's their reward. For other folks, the reward through positive reinforcement through eating well and exercising has a longer term reward component to it. And sometimes we'll talk about being able to kind of push off that satisfaction until later. If I lose 2 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, and it takes a month, 2 months, 3 months, that's a positive reinforcement. Now, of course, it's more complicated because of the behaviors. It's multiple behaviors. But if I just focused on eating, that's an individual behavior, right? Eating well or eating salads or something like that. And that's in the real world. Another positive reinforcement reward is, especially if the person's like a B-type personality, is slapping them on the back and going, great job, Bob. Man, I'm so pleased. You've been getting here on time you haven't missed a workout in 3 months. That's fantastic. And if you do that over and over and over, that's positive reinforcement. But you got to do it over and over and over. This comes, potentially dangerously close to this concept of extinction that you got to be careful of, because once you stop providing the reward, you stop providing that positive reinforcement, well, guess what happens? The behavior is going to go back to what it was prior to you giving a reward for the behavior. So that's the idea of positive reinforcement. It's a reward. And so if you're looking at a quiz or a test question, they might ask something like, Mary has been going to the gym every day consistently. She's seen weight loss. Is this and she appreciates weight loss. She likes that, what is this consequence called? Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, or punishment? Well, obviously it's positive reinforcement. The term that gets people confused is this one, negative reinforcement. So remember, we said there's consequences to behaviors, to the behavior list within operant conditioning. It's the consequence. It's what happens after the behavior is committed, the behavior is performed, that is going to govern whether or not that behavior is continued or not. Okay. If I give you a treat, you're going to probably repeat the behavior. Skinner, by the way, you've probably seen this where they put a rat or mice or something in a cage, and if they click a little lever, boop, a little treat comes out. Well, guess what they do? Beep over and over and over and over. They do it so much, by the way, that they actually get fat and overweight, because all they want is that same reward over and over and over. We are not rats, obviously. So that's why behavioralism as a psychological philosophy is correct in certain ways, but doesn't really suit all of our needs in something like fitness and health. But negative reinforcement, I don't want to get off track. Negative reinforcement is not slapping a person's hand. That's not negative reinforcement. Technically, negative reinforcement, because think about it. If I give you a reward, what are you going to do? You're going to repeat the behavior. Does that make sense? If I give you a reward after you do a behavior, the whole point is that now you want the reward, right? Isn't that what you want? You want to get the donut or the treat. I keep going back to donuts. But you're going to do the behavior over, get the reward. Wow, I like the reward. I'm going to do the behavior. Negative reinforcement is essentially the same thing. I want the behavior, whatever that behavior is, I want it to continue. But instead of giving you a reward to get you or to reinforce that behavior, what I do is I remove a stimulus that is undesirable. Classic example is your mom or your dad. Well, for those of you that are perhaps still living at home or you have kids, what is an undesirable behavior when it comes to your mom or your dad or my wife or somebody's husband? I don't want them to get mad at me, yell at me for not doing a behavior. What is the behavior? It's taking out the garbage. So, I got to put the garbage out on Monday nights because that's when the pickup is on Tuesday mornings. So I've got to take the garbage out. And that is a desirable behavior. That is the behavior that I want to continue. Now, instead of every time I put the garbage out, my wife gives me a donut, which is not a bad idea. She's not going to do that. Well, that would be positive reinforcement, right? I do a behavior, I get a reward for it. No. In negative reinforcement, the idea is that I still want to do that behavior. I want to put the garbage out. But if I don't put the garbage out, right, if I don't do the behavior, I receive an undesirable stimulus, which is my wife going, why didn't you put the garbage out? All right. Or why didn't you put the garbage out? Or why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do this chore? Or the trainer, why didn't you come in on time? Why didn't you eat? Blah, blah, blah. Right. Why didn't you follow the meal plan? Well, I don't want to hear that. Right. That is an undesirable stimulus. I don't want to hear my wife, or you don't want to hear your husband, or you don't want to hear your boss yelling at you or creating an undesirable stimulus. So if you remove that stimulus, right? If I don't want to get yelled at, I'm going to do the behavior. Do you see how it gets reinforced? The behavior gets reinforced because now you are removing the undesirable stimulus, getting yelled at. I hope that makes sense. That's why negative reinforcement can be a little bit challenging to understand. There's some assumptions with negative reinforcement, and that is that when the desired behavior is not performed, that there is a negative stimulus. Now, if I live alone and I don't take the garbage out, there's no negative stimulus or undesirable stimulus. It's only the fact that I'm married and my wife is going to yell at me for not taking the garbage out that it creates the ability for negative reinforcement to occur. Hope that makes sense. Now think about that for a second in the real world of training, in the real world of being a fitness trainer, especially when it comes to like nutrition, just as for instance. Your clients more than likely do not want to hear you call them out. They do not want to listen to you lovingly chastise them because they come in late for their workouts every single day. If it's that bad, if it's such an undesirable stimulus, and all they have to do is actually show up on time and they don't have to listen to me as a trainer, I'm going to do the behavior. And this way I don't have to deal with that negative or that undesirable stimulus. That's what negative, for the most part, that's what negative reinforcement is. And that's what they're explaining to you. Of course, there's two others. There's what's known as extinction, and simply the loss of conditioning over time. Remember, conditioning is all about the behavior. The behavior is performed and a consequence occurs. If the consequence is a reward, and by the way, this is why rewards can actually be problematic. Okay, you get the idea. Behaviorist and behavioralism is great for rats, but for humans, that's where the concept of cognition and behavior, where now we're talking about, and by the way, this is the self-determination theory, and they kind of bring that in a little bit. Self-determination focuses on extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. If the only way I get you to come to the gym is by giving you a donut, that's a problem. That's going to be a problem especially over time. Extinction is the loss of conditioning over time, which means that this behavior that is reinforced every time you get a reward, that behavior, if the only reason that behavior occurs is because of the reward, what happens when I remove the reward over time? The behavior stops. And so that's what extinction is. That's the concept. And they explain that in here. And then, of course, there's what's known as punishment. It's not what you think. It's not hitting somebody over the head with a bat because they did something wrong. Punishment is not about reinforcing behaviors like positive and negative reinforcement is. Punishment is about eliminating behaviors, right? And so the term punishment, and by the way, it also decreases, and this is what ACE is telling you. Punishment decreases the likelihood of the behavior reoccurring, and consists of, here's another term, aversive stimulus following a behavior, aversive, okay? If you don't do that dumbbell curl correctly, I'm gonna hit you with a cattle prod. Well, you're probably gonna start to do it correctly after a while. Your cattle prod has a lot of voltage to it. I'm giving you an example. So there is a negative, or what's known as an aversive bad stimulus that occurs after you do the behavior. Okay, so this is where operant conditioning, this concept of operant conditioning can be relatively simple to understand as long as you understand those different consequences, as long as you understand that antecedents are these conditions, environmental conditions that lead to behaviors. And then stimulus control is basically controlling the antecedent to some extent, which leads to a behavior that leads to some sort of consequence. And what are the consequences? Well, I can get rewarded for it. I can have an undesirable stimulus removed, or in the case of punishment, I can have an undesirable or aversive stimulus occurring when I do the behavior. For the most part, human beings deal with all of these. Okay, as a trainer, the term accountability is what we use. Well, that's what this is. Accountability has, for the most part, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and in one sense, punishment, in a sense, all involved. And it depends on the personality type of the person. So just keep in mind that in chapter 3, this stuff that you're going through can be helpful in the real world, but you also don't want to get so far into the academia of this that we forget we're dealing with people, we're dealing with humans, and you're running a business. And you only have so much time you can actually talk to an individual. So you got to make sure that it's on point and you hold people accountable in a way that's going to fit in line with their personality. So let me move on. Cognitions and behavior, cognitive distortions, right? Or excuse me, replacing irrational thoughts, because go back to page 84. And they go back, by the way, ACE goes back and tells you that when you go back and look at the health belief model and the self-determination theory and the trans theoretical model, a person's, in this case, exercise behavior is influenced by how they think about exercise and about succeeding in an exercise program. It's not just about basic behaviors with consequences. This is the move. ACE makes the move here, believe it or not, between the behaviorists and the cognitions, or the cognitive psychologists, right? Because that is the move today. Remember, operant conditioning, behavioralism, it doesn't take into account emotions, doesn't take into account the psycho-emotive components of behavior, which are clearly a part of behavioral modification. So the cognitive, like cognitive behavioral therapy, uses the mind and uses behaviors to get appropriate behaviors in place, or to eliminate, or at least to get away from performing ineffective, inefficient behaviors. So cognition and behavior, replacing irrational thoughts, as you see here. Now, this is again a point of memorization. What are the cognitive distortions, right? And I'll just throw this all up here for you. So what are the cognitive distortions? Well, that's on page 85, and that's where that pretty little, I don't know if you can see that, but that pretty little figure 3.5, common cognitive distortions. This is my recommendation. Come on over. Now, they did it in color, which is kind of cool, but this is where I pull out my pad and I start writing this down, jumping to conclusions. My recommendation is don't look at what they mean. They're pretty straightforward. Do you jump to conclusions? Okay. No one in my family thinks I'll be able to reach my goal, run another 5K race. So these are cognitive distortions. These will have an effect. The whole point here is that these have an effect on behavior. Literally, your clients will not come into the gym, or they'll miss workouts. Excuse me. They may not eat well. They may do behaviors, right? Irrespective of the reward that they're getting, the positive reinforcement, because of this, right, going on in here, right? All this stuff. I don't know about you guys, but you know, when you're in your head, spend a lot of time in there, you start to go through these, start to think about these. These are the irrational thoughts. How do you replace them? And that's literally what we're talking about here. The way ACE recommends you do it is you do what most of us will do, which is just ask questions. You don't have to memorize all these questions. But one thing about the material in this part is that it's just common sense, I would think. I mean, let me know if you think it's common sense or not. Cognitive distortions are jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, and minimization. This is a big one, by the way, just as an aside. From a psychological perspective, especially C-type personalities, if you know the ABCD personality spectrum, they tend to catastrophize. Read through that and make sure you understand what that means. Okay. Magnification and minimization, blowing things out of proportion. Do you do that? And remember, cognitive. What does cognitive mean? Maybe I should start with that. Cognitive means the thinking you in your head, your client in their head. The only way we can get inside someone's head and kind of help them, and by the way, this is kind of psychotherapy, counseling, is you got to ask them questions. You got to get them to say it out loud so that what is irrational, by the way, these are irrational. It's not rational. The world's not going to end, right? If you do this. So, you know, it's not that you can't do it, right? These are irrational thoughts. You got to, by getting people to answer questions, so to speak, they start to be a little bit more rational. I got to do this with some folks. I have to do with some family members. I let them talk it out. Okay, now is it really that bad? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to give you my opinion on it. It seems to be really that bad, right? That is catastrophizing, labeling. Oh, he's such a fool, right? So just read through those. Overgeneralizing. I tend to do that a lot. All or nothing thinking. I do that all the time. However, when I do it, I know that I'm doing it. It's not an impediment. It doesn't change appropriate behavior. Remember, step back. Your clients need to do things that are effective behaviorally and stop doing things that are ineffective behaviorally. That's what this is helping you to understand and appreciate, and then ultimately actually implement in some way, shape, or form. And the way you do that, by the way, personalization and blame, and in the Think It Through page 85, reflecting on your own behavior, read through that. This, of course, leads to, and this is what ACE is doing, it's pulling you into the actual how do I do this then? How do I stop doing those things? From the behavioralist standpoint, they say, well, provide positive reinforcement, provide negative reinforcement, or in the end, provide punishment to stop the behavior from occurring, right? Well, okay, yeah, I guess I'm with you in one sense. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. To a certain extent for a short period of time, yeah, a little bit, but in the end, for the long term, no, it doesn't. So that's why now we move into, I already put it up for you, goal setting. I mean, as you read through that, by the way, it's just a paragraph. Straightforward behavioral change strategies. I'm not saying goal setting is the end all, but it's a good start because it gets people to kind of write things down and be cognizant of it, right? And you use the SMART acrostic. Specific, measurable, and I forgot the other three. No, I'm just messing. Attainable, realistic, and timely. So if you use that acrostic, that's how you would set up your basic goal setting scenario for a client. And then, of course, there is what's known as self-monitoring, self-regulation. You know, the idea is that self-monitoring and here's what they say, is one of the cognitive processes, not behavioral processes, cognitive. There's the difference. Behavioral cognitive processes of self. What is self-regulation? It's self-explanatory. You regulate your behaviors. One of the ways you've got to regulate your behaviors is through the way you think, right? If you were a robot, I can wind you up and just let you go. You would eat well and you'd exercise. Everything would be perfect. You're not a robot, you think. And so self-regulation requires a specific way of dealing with your thought patterns. And that's what this is explaining or getting into. Clients progress, and here the personal trainer can utilize open-ended questions. Look, this is what ACE is talking about all through the beginning parts of these chapters. Open-ended questions. That's kind of that is the model, right? The IFT model focuses on these different aspects, development of rapport, things like this, and asking open-ended questions, right? The ABC approach, okay? So, and you can look at the questions, you can apply your own. Here is where in the real world, now that's going to be the end of it, self-monitoring, self-regulation. Again, they make sense because the very words are the explanation of what it is you're talking about, monitoring yourself, right? So you have to think certain ways. You've got to change your irrational way of thinking to a more rational way of thinking so that your behaviors will come in line with your values and your goals, right? And so the idea is that you can consistently ask open-ended questions and have people kind of rationalize the way they're thinking to pull them away from irrational ways of thinking. Oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. What would make somebody say that? I mean, I've spoken to clients that are overweight and they need to lose 30, 40, 50 pounds. And they're like, well, I'm never going to do it. And then I talk to them and I realize that they've done it 4 or 5 times before. Well, I yo-yo diet. Okay, hang on a second. If you yo-yo diet, there's a part of yo-yo dieting where you actually lost all the weight. How did you do it? We're just going to change now the irrational thinking and the behaviors that made you go whoop, back up in weight. That's kind of a real world scenario. Bottom of page 86, behavioral interventions. Read through that. Again, I'm not saying that that's going to be on the test, but what ACE has done is they've given you some sort of side information here, right? A little off the side that gives you a little bit more in-depth understanding of the material. So if you're not getting the terminology, that's one thing. And I hope, in all of my rambling, I've helped you to understand some of these terms. So let's go back up here. Operant conditioning, the reinforcements or the consequences, antecedents, stimulus, control, extinction, punishment. They are real world concepts that you, by the way, you do it every day. You personally do this every day with yourself and with your family and with your pets. Just as for instance, you're doing it all the time. The goal is to see the terms as they fit in to an actual scenario with clients. And that's why, once again, when you get to the end of that particular section, the apply what you know box can be very helpful. Now, that's the middle of the chapter. Physical activity and adherence is after that. But I hope this helps. And again, this is because of Kathy asking this question. And I know some folks probably out there thinking the same thing. Remember, anytime you ask a question or you post something that is confusing you or you're having struggles with, you're actually speaking for not only yourself, but for probably hundreds, if not more, students that are also, they just didn't want to post it. Okay. So great chapter, a lot of really good information. Again, my recommendation, just like I've done with everything from a study perspective, is to help you not only from the material perspective, but the specifics of how to study it to memorize it. So as always, it's a pleasure coming and helping you with the materials in the ACE 6th edition. If you have any questions on what I just went over today, or again, any questions on other materials that we are going over, please go ahead and post them into the group. Remember, we are here to help you pass the ACE exam on the first attempt, or if you've already tried and you failed, to pass it on your next go around. Do not go into this. It's a hard exam. It's a very difficult exam. Don't go into it unprepared. We're here to help you out. We're trainers. That's what we do. And we do it all the time. We've been doing it for years, decades, in fact. And so we just want you guys to be effective trainers and get your clients what they're paying for, okay, which are results. And in chapter 3 of the ACE 6th edition, they've given you a lot of really good information to help move you along that path. Appreciate having me here for this particular study, and we will see you next week. Thanks.